Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reacts to the short-lived uprising which took place in Russia against Russian President Vladimir Putin. A gang shooting related to drug trafficking violence in Honduras left at least 11 people dead. And we have an update on the wildfire situation in both Alberta and Quebec. Good news for both provinces as more rain is in the forecast to help with firefighting efforts.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says everyone has a lot of questions about what Saturday's short-lived uprising in Russia really means. But as a meeting of the leaders of Nordic countries wrapped up in Iceland, he says they don't have a lot of answers just yet. He says it's far too early to tell what it could mean for the war in Ukraine. Trudeau and the Nordic leaders maintained the war was an internal issue for Russia to address and reaffirmed their support for Ukraine. Trudeau says it's important to be unified as NATO allies.
Our conversations around how we continue to stand strong as NATO allies in the face of Russian aggression in Ukraine, but also the impacts on Arctic security and how we continue to stand strong for our peoples. We talked about Indigenous issues. We talked about a range of challenges that we each share, that we can coordinate on better and draw on each other for strengths and solutions. We had obviously very serious conversations about possible implications of the internal challenges that Russia is facing. It is their internal challenges, but our strength in continuing to stand for Ukraine, continue to stand to defend the values of democracy and openness and territorial integrity and sovereignty that define not just our approaches but the United Nations approach to the world rules-based order remains consistent.
Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says it appears as though the Russian uprising is on hold for now. The Wagner Group's chief Yevgeny Prigozhin ordered his mercenary forces to turn back and not head towards Moscow to avoid any more Russian bloodshed.
Here you have the Wagner Group, which is the mercenary arm of Putin's army, say, wait a minute, we're not down. We're going to return back to Moscow. This is enough, enough with the bloodshed. We've had too many casualties on the part of the Russians. And that is perhaps the most honest we've seen in terms of the Russian mercenaries. But of course, I'm sure he was delivered a very harsh threat, and the finger was definitely pointing at him. And he basically decided to halt this kind of rebellion against Putin.
Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will also have details on how Cyprus prevented a terrorist attack on Jews and Israelis. She'll have details coming up in the second half of our program. Christian relief organization Samaritan's Purse has been helping the people of Ukraine by providing some much-needed food. Food that was recently needed by those who survived a missile strike which hit their apartment complex. 9 people died and dozens others were wounded in the attack.
We're here at the location of a missile impact that destroyed a residential building. We're seeing and hearing reports of more than 9 people who have been killed from this strike and dozens more who have been wounded. Many of the residents of the building have been displaced and have been moving to different areas across this residential block. So in times like this, it's a true blessing and opportunity to be able to respond with not only emergency food supplies, which sustain people in their physical needs, but also with the love of Christ.
Samaritan's Purse have a lot of partners, and as soon as possible these kind of partners come in this area, like this town who was struck by missiles, and provide some help to people who lost everything.
We just have this amazing blessing to be able to provide this emergency supplies and be the true hands and feet of Christ by giving them these things with the opportunity as well to provide the gospel.
The smoke from the wildfires burning in northern Quebec is so thick that the province has been forced to ground some of its water bombers and helicopters. Smoke from the 29 wildfires burning out of control is causing widespread smog and special weather statements in both Quebec and Ontario. A lot of the smoke has also made its way to the eastern seaboard of the United States. Heavy rain is expected across the region this week, which should help firefighting efforts. As for Alberta, emergency officials say there are 83 active wildfires burning in our province, with 11 being out of control. 27 are being held, and fortunately 45 are under control. Rain in our province has also been helping firefighter efforts. The phased general re-entry of Fort Chipewyan residents continues. That follows the end of all evacuation orders for the hamlet and surrounding areas. The evacuation order, however, is still in effect for Little River Cree Nation Fox Lake. The number of Albertans who remain evacuated is at 2,752. As for the suspected causes of number of wildfires, 394 were human-caused, 154 were started by lightning, and 122 of the fires are suspicious and are currently under investigation. With these active fires still burning in the province, an information officer with Alberta Wildfire says they're continuing their efforts to put the blazes out, which includes the help of crews from other jurisdictions. Officials are also reminding residents to exercise caution as we make our way to the Canada Day long weekend.
We are continuing to get in this support that has been helping us greatly. We're super appreciative of it. Like I said, the rain that we've had recently has really helped our firefighting efforts. Our firefighters have been able to go in and extinguish hot spots and work on containment guards within these fires to try and contain them. There is still a fire restriction in effect in the northern areas of the province. So that means that you can't have a campfire on public land. You can only have it on private property and within campgrounds.
And now the ban also includes fireworks and explosive targets. Alberta's Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services, Jason Nixon, is speaking out following Lethbridge West MLA Shanna Phillips' comments that the province needs to do more to address the housing crisis here in our city. Phillips says rising poverty is causing more homeless issues. She says the Alberta NDP put forward several recommendations to address the issue, including the formation of an all-party committee. Minister Nixon joins us now from his constituency office in Sundre, Alberta, to address the comments made by NDP's Shannon Phillips. So, Minister Nixon, how do you respond to Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips, who says that Lethbridge has a real homeless and housing crisis?
You know, when the NDP were in power between 2015 and 2019, Shannon Phillips was there and oversaw a 76% increase to the affordable housing waiting list. So, you know, with all due respect to Shannon Phillips, we don't tend to be lectured about affordable housing by her. Instead, we're focused on our plan, which is investment in recovery beds, as well as investments inside affordable housing and homeless shelters. And you're going to see over the next 3 years, over $1 billion being invested by the Alberta government into new affordable housing units, on top of about $250 million in rent supplements, on top of an investment of 10,000 new recovery beds inside our province, which we think is going to continue to cause the affordable housing wait list to go down and will continue to be a high priority of the government.
Now, you discussed the province as a whole, but what about Lethbridge specifically? How will the province help our most vulnerable here in the Windy City?
The most recent investments in Lethbridge on the affordable housing side have been done in partnership with the Lethbridge Housing Authority. Just over 40 new units have come online in our partnership with them. But on top of that, the new recovery center that we built right on the Blood First Nation community outside of Lethbridge, which is having a significant impact on Lethbridge when it comes to helping people who are facing addictions. And certainly Lethbridge is going to have a big portion of that $1 billion of new affordable housing that's going to be taking place across the province. So, you know, that is a big part of the focus, obviously, is affordable housing units. I will point out, and this is very relevant to Lethbridge, who is seeing a significant homeless population who's facing addictions. And that is the fact that Alberta's government is investing unprecedented amounts in recovery beds. And over the next 3 years, you're going to see 10,000 new recovery beds come online, which can have a very big impact on the homeless crisis that Lethbridge is managing in that portion of our province.
So what are your thoughts on potentially forming an all-party committee to address some of the homeless issues that many regions in our province are facing?
You know, Albertans are waiting for that investment to take place. We know there has to be an investment in affordable housing. We know it's a priority. And so I would say the province doesn't need a bunch of politicians sitting around the committee table coming up with the same solution. The solution is to invest, and that's going to take place now. It's already passed through the Alberta budget. My department is diligently working with our partners across the province to make sure that investment takes place. And again, over the next 3 years, over $1 billion more affordable housing units coming online in the province is significant. And so that's where my focus is going to be right now, is executing on that plan.
Thank you so much for your time. That was Alberta Social Services Minister Jason Nixon joining us from Sundre. The Alberta government says eligible drivers 18 and over will now automatically exit from the Graduated Driver License or GDL program. The province says it will save new drivers the $154 to exit the GDL program. Officials say GDL drivers who have completed their 24-month driving period and have no suspensions or demerits within the last 12 months of probation will receive a letter informing them about the change. Now, in a release, Transport Minister Devin Derision says GDL was an expensive licensing scheme that discriminated against young drivers. He says there are 500,000 young Albertans with clean driving records who would need to pay $154 and waste their time to take another driving test. Well, we've been experiencing a little bit of humidity here in southwestern Alberta with the rain and warmer temperatures. Angela Stewart is in now with an early peek at the forecast. Angela, we could potentially see more moisture developing tonight?
Yes, we are going to be seeing lots of rain come over our region over the next little bit here. Starting tonight, there is a risk of a thunderstorm, but we are going to be seeing about a 30% chance of rain tonight, sitting at a low of 12 degrees there, as you can see. That rain also sticking around for tomorrow, but we are going to be seeing some sunshine in the morning, so that is good news there. Reaching a high of 28 degrees there before that risk of a thunderstorm, like I mentioned, and sitting at a low of 13 degrees. As for how the rest of the week is shaping up, I'll have all those details coming up later in the show.
Great. Thanks so much, Angela. A shooting linked to drug trafficking violence has left 11 people dead in Honduras. Police say they arrested the suspect in the pool hall shooting, which may be revenge for the gang-related massacre at a women's prison, which left 46 female inmates dead. The Honduran government has vowed to crack down on gang violence and put curfews in place. The military police have taken charge of the country's prisons since ammunition, guns, and grenades were found in a men's prison in Tamara. That's the same town where the women's prison massacre occurred. Anderson Lee Aldrich pleaded guilty to killing 5 people and wounding 17 others at a gay nightclub in Colorado Springs, Colorado last fall. The charges include 5 counts of murder and 46 counts of attempted murder from the November 19th shooting at Club Q.
Tell me in your own words what it is you did that makes you feel that you are guilty of these crimes.
I intentionally and after deliberation caused the death of each victims listed in those counts.
Lethbridge police have laid charges in connection with a stabbing earlier this month. On June 10th at around 1:30 in the morning, police responded to a report about a fight along the 400 block of Mayor McGrath Drive South. When they arrived, they found a 38-year-old man who had been stabbed. He was taken to hospital with serious injuries. Police say the two parties knew each other. On June 24th, a male suspect was arrested. 34-year-old Anthony Davis Belanger of Lethbridge is charged with aggravated assault and possession of an offensive weapon dangerous to the public. He's in custody and will appear in court on July the 5th. Lethbridge City Council is looking into approving $170,000 in funding to support the Diversion Outreach Team, otherwise known as DOT. The money will go towards new vehicles for the group. DOT is a service through the Community Social Development Department, which helps some of our city's most vulnerable.
The type of vehicle that DOT uses, it's a fairly specialty vehicle, and then it comes down to just, again, the mechanical wear and tear that the vehicles have. These current vehicles, I believe, are only about 5 years old, and the amount of kilometers and the, again, wear and tear that they put on is substantial, and so buying new has been the preferred approach.
The item will now head to Lethbridge City Council and will likely be discussed at the July 11th meeting. June is National Indigenous Peoples Month, and to mark this special occasion, Indigenous healing gardens are now sprouting up across southern Alberta. Around 15 facilities across the south zone of AHS will see new gardens planted, including at the Chinook Regional Hospital here in Lethbridge. Video journalist Micah Quinn was at the hospital on Monday morning and has the story on the 4 main plants that were put in the ground.
Mint, sweetgrass, sage, and saskatoons, and these 4 plants have medicinal properties.
According to staff with AHS, sweetgrass is used in smudge as an energy food and can help treat cough, cold, and fever. Mint can be made into tea for comfort or to treat an upset stomach and sore throat. Silver green leaves of sage can be chewed for sore throat, and Saskatoon berries are used as food and medicine, but also for tools, arrow shafts, and pipe stems.
The plants all have healing and medicinal properties and are used by our people for thousands of years. So it's genuinely a huge step in terms of reconciliation and filling the health gap. We are hoping that these gardens are going to get bigger. We're hoping to incorporate art pieces next year, to incorporate other medicines and plants. We have rolled out these gardens in almost all the South Zone sites.
Patients and visitors can now access 2 of the healing gardens at the front of the Chinook Regional Hospital, along with the rooftop.
It's important to acknowledge that we are on Blackfoot territory, that we have the privilege of providing healthcare services on Blackfoot territory, and that we need to incorporate traditional medicines and plants into the work we do. We had the opportunity to have William Singer, who is a seed keeper from the Blood or Gain a Nation. We engaged William, who put together some videos to help us understand what the traditional medicines mean and how to care for them. And so we shared that across the province, but particularly in Calgary and South Zone.
Patients, Indigenous liaisons, and physicians will work with site managers to create their own healing gardens. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
What a cool idea. Many areas of southwestern Alberta saw kind of a mixed bag today weather-wise. Some sunshine, some clouds, even light showers, and more moisture is on the way. A full look at the weather pictures on deck. We've seen a few thunderstorms here in southwestern Alberta lately, and that trend may continue for the short term. Angela Stewart is in now with all of the weather details. Angela, there was quite the light show with lots of lightning coming back from Calgary on Sunday night. We could potentially see more lightning along with maybe thunder again tonight?
Yes, absolutely, Hal. We are going to be seeing a risk of a thunderstorm tonight. About a 30% chance of rain is expected tonight. Into tomorrow as well, that rain is also going to last as well. A risk of a thunderstorm is expected for Tuesday, but as the rest of the week goes on, temperatures and conditions will be improving. Like I mentioned, 29, reaching those high to mid-20s, shooting up to 30 degrees on Friday there, so it's a great way to start off our weekend. 29 for Saturday, and then back up to 31 degrees on Sunday as we head back into the work week. So all around pretty good news there. Our average high for this time of year is 24 degrees. Our average low is 10. 34 degrees was the highest temperature recorded back in 1970. Our lowest temperature was 0 back in 1951. Our sun rose at 5:25 this morning and is expected to set at 9:43. So that will put us around 16 hours and 18 minutes of daylight. Now, looking at conditions and temperatures across the country now for Tuesday. Out on the island for Victoria, Vancouver inland, 22 degrees, 21, so it's going to be beautiful all around. Looking to the rest of the country now, heading to Alberta, this is where we're going to be seeing those soggy, wet conditions. Edmonton, Calgary, both expected to see a risk of a thunderstorm tomorrow. I guess you could just say this time of year that's expected. We're seeing lots more rain and wet conditions. So Alberta's not the only province that will be seeing those soggy, wet conditions. Saskatoon, Regina, that's kind of the same deal, 27, 29. Gonna be feeling around like 30 degrees with that humidex. Winnipeg, same deal, risk of a thunderstorm tomorrow. 28 degrees is the expected high. Toronto, to the central part of the country now, Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. It's going to be feeling humid, but it's also going to be soggy and wet and cool, like I mentioned. They're also all under a risk of a thunderstorm, 23, 25, and 23 for both of those cities. Now, as we move to Atlantic Canada, it's kind of the same thing. Like I just keep reiterating myself here. Fredericton, Halifax, and Charlottetown, all of these areas in here, St. John's as well, they're going to be seeing some fog patches, but as the days go on tomorrow, or as the day goes on, that's when they're going to be seeing that risk of a thunderstorm. I believe 5 to 10 millimeters of rain also in Halifax. So needless to say, don't put your umbrella and rain boots away because you are going to need it. And that is your full weather forecast for you.
Cenovus Energy's been hit with a cleanup order after diesel spilled into a northwest Alberta lake. The Alberta Energy Regulator issued the non-compliance order last week after more than 1,000 litres of fuel spilled into Rainbow Lake. The agency says Cenovus was operating a temporary diesel generator near the lake after the loss of electricity due to wildfires. It also says Cenovus has activated an emergency response plan and is working to retain and recover the leaked diesel. Crime is having a severe impact in our city. Now, that's according to Trevor Lewington, the CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge. Lewington says what he's hearing most from business owners is that better enforcement is needed, especially in our downtown core.
I know in particular the BRZ, for example, has expressed concern to the city about how enforcement of public nuisance bylaws are actually happening and what's the track record there. So enforcement's certainly part of the answer. Studies, of course, have shown that you need to get people off the streets. You need to get them into attainable and suitable housing with appropriate supports, that's actually far cheaper than people going through the criminal justice system and having to rely on emergency services. So, I really think one of the key challenges ahead, not only for the province, is also the city to work more closely together. Housing and homelessness is, predominantly a provincial jurisdiction, but the reality is we see it in our downtown, and it's the city of Lethbridge that must respond.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Trevor Lewington from Economic Development Lethbridge and BCN's Naveen Day coming up after Business News. Shopify says it will fight a request from the Canada Revenue Agency for 6 years' worth of merchant tax records. On social media recently, the e-commerce giant's chief executive called the request a low-key overreach. The government says the records are being sought in order to verify that Canadian merchants are obeying the Income Tax Act and the Excise Tax Act. All parties involved are asking for a one-day hearing on the matter to take place between February and March of next year. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 169 points on the day to finish at 19,587. The Dow was down 12 points to 33,714. The S&P 500 was down 19 on the day to 4328. And the Nasdaq was down 156 points to 13,335. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 39 cents to 69.55 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 4 cents to 2.77 U.S. Gold was up 2.06 to 19.2326 U.S. an ounce. And silver was even on the day at 22.79 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.43 per bushel. Barley's at $9.12, canola's at $16.88, and corn is at $10.59 per bushel. Live cattle were up 20 cents to $177.70. Feeder cattle August contract was down 28 cents to $233.68, and lean hogs July contract was up $2.13 to $93.40. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 76.04 U.S. Recapping one of our top stories, the Alberta government says eligible drivers 18 and over will automatically exit the Graduated Driver License, or GDL, program. The province says it will save new drivers the $154 to exit the program. Officials say GDL drivers who've completed their 24-month driving period and have no suspensions or demerits within the last 12 months of probation will receive a letter informing them about the change. Coming up, our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will have more on the recent but short uprising against Russian President Vladimir Putin by mercenary forces in Russia. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Discover a new activity that you love. All are invited to this summer's Give It a Try events, hosted by the Lethbridge Sport Council. It's a great opportunity to try your hand at a new sport like climbing, badminton, handball, and more. Events are free to attend. Register in advance by visiting lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/program/give-it-a-try. Go back in time and see what it was like to live as a pioneer. Coyote Flats Pioneer Village is a Western heritage museum located 1.5 kilometers south of Pitcher Butte. Walk through the village and visit an old-time railway station, post office, fire hall, school, and so much more. The museum is open daily from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. with admission of $10 for adults or $20 per family. For more information, visit coyoteflats.org. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Anti-Semitism appears to be growing all over the world. Now, over the weekend, police in Cyprus thwarted a terror attack targeting Jews. To talk about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert and the host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, who joins us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, according to media reports, the planned attacks against Israelis and Jews was by Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. That was until the Cypriot intelligence stepped in to collaborate with both Israel and the United States.
Right. Well, thank God for their collaborations and the fact that the Americans and the Israelis were able to get there in time to alert Cyprus officials that there was such a plan in the pipeline, that they were able to stop it. You know, obviously it's known by Iran's Revolutionary Guard that a lot of Israelis have moved to Cyprus, to Greece, that live all throughout the Middle East and on the European coasts. And for that reason, they find it to be an opportunity where Israeli intelligence perhaps is not as active as it is on the Israel mainland, but that where they can get their appendages, where they can get, you know, individuals and communities and still call it a victory. But in this case, again, a great example of a plot that was foiled. Of course, this plot being now denied by Iran's regime, but it was in fact the Revolutionary Guard. We know that they work abroad. We know that they have these not just splinter groups, but this is obviously coming from the regime, but they operate in different parts of the world, and of course targeting Israelis and Jews in this case. But we know that in recent months they have doubled down on their efforts to go after Western assets in Syria as well, especially the Americans. They want to push the United States out of Syria together with Russia. They're working very, very diligently to intimidate, kill, attack, target American forces inside Syria. So they're working very hard. I mean, tell this to the White House that wants to strike a deal with them, that wants to normalize relations with them. This is what Iran's regime is up to.
Now, still with Iran, intelligence sources from 3 different countries say that Iran is on the cusp of testing its first nuclear warhead. And Lisa, that's not good news for us here in the West.
No, it's not, especially when this, nuclear weapons boogeyman is always what is brought up as the reason why the West should negotiate another nuclear deal with Iran's regime. And what does that mean? We shake hands with them. We normalize relations with them. We take sanctions off of them, and we give them billions of dollars to put right back into these nefarious activities, right back into regional terrorism and supporting groups like the Houthis in Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas among the Palestinians. So it just continues these, insurgencies, and we know that this is their behavior. If there was one thing that the White House and the European Union wanted to sell us on in terms of getting back into an Iran nuclear deal, it was, well, it's going to curb their weapons program. And here you have it, Hal, right? They're testing weapons. They are enriching uranium. We know that they have marched forward with their weapons program. Just under the Biden administration, we know that they have exponentially advanced their weapons program. And of course, the argument that they'll make is that, well, because we weren't in a deal, because Donald Trump pulled out of the deal in 2018, we are no longer in a deal. The Iranian regime has marched forward with a weapons program. Where there is a will, there is a way. I don't think that this is, a good sign for a trusting partner that we want to strike another nuclear deal with. So the fact that they're testing weapons is not good news.
Lisa, it appears as though an uprising against the Russian government is on hold for now. The Wagner Group's chief ordered his mercenary forces to turn back and return to their bases. Yevgeny Prigozhin told them to stop heading towards Moscow. Now, he said the move was being done in order to avoid shedding Russian blood. And Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed harsh punishment for the armed rebellion led by Prigozhin.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go over well, even though they're saying that he's only going to be exiled to Belarus and there's not going to be further punishment for him. Look, you don't turn on Putin and get away with it, right? This is the head of the Wagner Group. He said he wants to stop the bloodshed. He thinks this is a pointless war. I mean, that's a lot already in and of itself. I think this is a major turning point in the invasion of over a year. We have been waiting for something starting to kind of break here, right? So we have seen Russia march on from February of last year. Putin invaded Ukraine. We thought it's going to be very quick. It wasn't. It's still in some sort of a holding pattern. We see some sort of update here and there in terms of escalations. We're worried about nuclear weapons being used. We're worried about chemical weapons being used. But yet we have not seen the Russians be able to advance to a point of victory, and we haven't been able to have the Ukrainians fight back to a point where it means significant retreat on the part of the Russians. Here you have the Wagner Group, which is the mercenary arm of Putin's army, say, wait a minute, we're not down. We're going to return back to Moscow. This is enough with the bloodshed. We've had too many casualties on the part of the Russians. And that is perhaps the most honest we've seen in terms of the Russian mercenaries. But of course, I'm sure he was delivered a very harsh threat, and the finger was definitely pointing at him, and he basically decided to halt this kind of rebellion against Putin, and we shall see what will happen to him, and we shall see, more importantly, where this is going and how this will affect the larger picture of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
And there are reports surfacing now that Wagner Group chief Prigozhin will avoid criminal charges, but instead is being exiled.
Right. So, I mean, again, who knows? I would think that Putin would want to make an example out of him, maybe hang him in a public square. But we're being told that he's only going to be exiled to Belarus. Look, Belarus is in cahoots, right? We know Lukashenko is involved in all of this, but all of a sudden, he's basically going to be absorbed by Belarus, who is on the side of Putin. I don't buy it. So there's something more to this. Perhaps they're going to get rid of him that way, at least get him out of the picture that way. They may have agreed to some sort of compromise in terms of getting him out of the picture so that Putin can move forward. Look, Putin is not as much worried about his image or the PR here at the moment, right? He is known to be this rogue dictator, and right now the craziest and most dangerous man on the globe. And he kind of is enjoying that, because if he weren't, he would do something about it, whether it would be to escalate, de-escalate. Everyone's been talking about that so-called off-ramp. I mean, what's it going to take to get him off of this path? But, in terms of getting his own people out of the way, so far we hear that he's going to be sent to Belarus, and that they have stopped this mutiny on Putin.
When it comes to Putin, he uses fear as a control tactic. So many dictators around the world still use that same tactic so many years later. Lisa, a number of Chinese companies have had charges filed against them for illicit fentanyl production. Now, top prosecutors in the United States say this new tactic will hopefully stem the flow of the powerful drug here into North America.
Right. So the Western forces have tried to deliver this stern warning to the Chinese government about fentanyl. Although I know that Antony Blinken, Secretary of State here in the United States, traveled to China and basically told them, we think that you may be accidentally shipping fentanyl material, basically letting them off the hook, but trying to deliver some sort of message about the fentanyl. Now, what the United States is doing is going after private companies that are actually involved in selling these parts, the chemicals involved in the production of fentanyl, and targeting them specifically so that they can perhaps curb this flow of fentanyl to the West. As you know, Hal, we are finding so much fentanyl here on a daily basis, enough to kill the population of the United States 4 or 5 times over. I mean, we're talking about daily. And these are always young children, young teens who have almost never experimented before. It's their first time. They don't have the experience, and they're dying of overdose because of the potency of the fentanyl drug. So obviously, lawmakers doing whatever they can to stem the flow, and hopefully going after these private companies will do the trick.
Yeah, we have to do more, absolutely. Lisa, a new intelligence report reveals that the Wuhan Institute in China collaborated with the Chinese military on coronavirus experiments. They allegedly did so for many years leading up to the COVID-19 pandemic. This really shouldn't be much of a surprise, I guess, should it?
It seems like nothing is a surprise when it comes to COVID and its origins, and no one's even paying attention anymore. I mean, we were fed all of these lies. And now that we're getting a bit more transparency, or there's some more investigations being done, it seems like no one's really paying attention. And allowing the current narrative status quo to remain. And that's very, very unfortunate. Millions of lives lost. And our own governments were not able to give us the truth or protect us, or even when there were questions, or there was kind of some sort of just curiosity as to how, what, where, when, why people were shut down, whether it was on social media, in the government. We know of individuals who were in the hospital with COVID, and if they were not vaccinated, they weren't treated properly. These are big accusations to make against the medical community, and I don't blame them. This is the information that the medical community was given, whether it came from pharmaceuticals, whether it came from legislators who were in power to do so, whether it came from Fauci or the Chinese government, et cetera. The point being that people were lied to and there was no transparency. So here, when we have these kinds of stories come out where the first few people to even get COVID were from the lab, they were working together with the Chinese military. We tried to push the Chinese. Certain lawmakers here in the United States said, don't touch the Chinese, don't talk about the Chinese. This is something that we have to deal with, and allowing this to spread. It's unfortunate, but I really do hope that we can correct the narrative in a way that puts us all in a nonpartisan way to get the truth on this.
Yeah, transparency is key. Lisa, now still in Asia, the North Korean government has called a recent visit by the U.S. submarine Michigan to South Korea a rehearsal for the further deployment of nuclear subs around the Korean peninsula. The USS Michigan visited the port of Busan in South Korea back on June 16th.
Yeah, so the North Koreans calling out the United States. This is all that this is. It's saying, I see you, I see what you're up to, and I'm going to call you out on it before it even happens. Obviously, we don't want any sort of escalation with North Korea. North Korea feels like they have enough leverage or enough of an upper hand, enough confidence right now to tell the United States, I see what you're up to, I don't like it. The fact that you have any presence around Korea, they know that we've been working together with the South Koreans. They know that there are a lot of countries in Asia who are worried about the power that China has and the power that North Korea has, especially with North Korea not being transparent about their weapons, about their nuclear weapons, about what they would do if they were in fact pushed to that level of escalation. So here you have the North Koreans telling us, I see you and I don't like it.
Lisa, there are reports that the Biden administration will cease funding for research, development, and scientific cooperation projects in the West Bank. Now, it's a move that comes a few years after the Trump administration approved the collaboration. How significant is this?
It's very significant. More symbolically than anything else, it is a move for the Biden White House to basically sign up for BDS, which is the boycott, divestment, weaponization of the economy to go against Israel. And we see it a lot from, Israel haters, and we see it a lot from anti-Semites in Congress, but we didn't expect to see it from President Biden himself, who has been more of a friend to Israel than, let's say, President Obama. Which, the two presidencies are often compared and very similar in certain ways, particularly with foreign policy. This is very surprising. I think it's more of an about-face from the Trump administration that was extremely friendly with Israel. Remember, they moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. They, gave a lot of legitimacy to a lot of these different parts of Israel that were always called into question by President Obama and others in recent years. But this also shows the strength and the ability of certain bullies and groups within Washington, D.C. that have had an effect on President Biden. Now, for example, President Trump reversed the aid that was going to the Palestinians because of their pay-to-slay program. So basically, they were blowing up innocent Israelis and they were getting monthly stipend checks for it. And U.S. taxpayer money was funding this. Of course, the Trump administration went back on this. And again, with a lot of pressure, the Biden administration said, we're going to start this aid to the Palestinians once again, no questions asked. So when you have this type of approach and you have all of this pressure on the Biden White House to be, to go against Israel, to step up the help for Palestinian aid, to support pay to slay and other things, well, this is what you get. And this is the result. Now, the only thing I ask people to do is never, ever fall for the fact that when they conflate, well, this is just an academic boycott, or this is just this is about the West Bank or it's about the so-called settlements. It's not. It's an anti-Semitic move. It's an anti-Zionist move, and it reflects a U.S. position against Israel, and it's very, very serious, especially right now.
She's our foreign affairs expert and host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari. Thanks so much for joining us today from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.
Over the years, the city of Lethbridge has been economically stable, attracting a wide variety of businesses. The business community here is somewhat unique in our province, as we have diverse economic drivers, including our flourishing agriculture industry. We wanted to check in with Trevor Lewington, who is the CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, to find out how the city of Lethbridge has been faring over the past while and what lies ahead for the summer months. Trevor, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's just start off by touching base on the recent provincial election, because it was a very, very close race with the UCP coming out on top, of course. What are you hearing from the business community as a whole, and how will this affect our economy for better or worse?
Well, I do think the business community collectively breathes a sigh of relief anytime an election is over. Doesn't matter who wins, elections are inherently unstable times, and you never know quite what's going to happen. So having an election over and done with is always good from a business perspective. The UCP government, part of their campaign, one of their key promises was to keep corporate taxes low. They're very focused on maintaining Alberta, frankly, as one of the most competitive tax jurisdictions, not just in Canada, but across North America. So that's generally good news for business. We do know that talent or workforce is one of the key concerns of the business community, continues to be, has been for a long time. And that's usually more a function of quality of life factors. So things like access to healthcare, education, recreational opportunities. So, I fully expect that the business community is going to be looking to the UCP to take quick and decisive action to improve those issues and ensure that Alberta becomes a good place for people to come and live. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what government's in power, there's always going to be variables like a war in Europe that no one really anticipated, like unprecedented inflation, that governments must respond to. So every government, regardless of policies and ideology, needs to be somewhat flexible and needs to be adaptable to the times that are ahead. So yeah, good. At least we've got a result. We've got a stable majority government, and we know, I think, what we're dealing with.
Good. And are there any specific changes you would like to see coming from the provincial governments that you feel would help Lethbridge businesses?
Yeah, last fall, we conducted our 4th annual Brighter Together business survey, and repeatedly businesses have told us there are a couple of concerns that bubble to the top for them on their radar. One, of course, is the affordability of utilities specifically, and the second being that workforce availability piece. So, for us locally, the good news, I think, is that the Lethbridge East MLA, Nathan Neudorf, was appointed the Minister of Affordability and Utilities. So he certainly has his work cut out for him. But addressing the cost of utilities, transmission and distribution costs, and ensuring a reliable grid as electrification continues without placing that burden on industry, I think is going to be one of the key challenges that he'll hear from the business community. And from a workforce perspective, the province has a number of immigration programs. So recently, we just launched the Rural Renewal Stream and the Rural Entrepreneur Stream of the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program, or AAIP. And that's one attempt to try and provide more opportunities for foreign workers, actually, to be available, and so that we can tap into that talent here locally in Lethbridge. And then the final thing I think that we need to be mindful of, or certainly I would counsel the province to be thinking of as they look at Lethbridge. 3 of our 5 largest major employers are the university, the college, and Alberta Health Services. We are predominantly a public sector community and economy. And so when the government makes budget reductions in those areas, it could be quite painful for the local economy. And, excited to see prior to the election, the government looking to reinvest in education, reinvest in our post-secondaries, and reinvest in healthcare. So I think that will, in turn, put more money into those institutions and help our economy locally.
Now, our downtown core always has the challenges of keeping the area safe and reducing drug use and the crime associated with this. What are you hearing from business owners and the public on this issue?
Yeah, there's no question that downtown safety continues to be a concern, not only for the public, but also for the business community. And we have to be mindful of, perception versus reality. But it's complex, right? There's social issues, there's housing issues, there's safety issues. So my advice to the business community is continue to speak out, continue to ask questions, use the organizations that are there to represent them, like the Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Downtown Business Revitalization Zone. I know in particular the BRZ, for example, has expressed concern to the city about how enforcement of public nuisance bylaws are actually happening and what's the track record there. So enforcement's certainly part of the answer. Studies, of course, have shown that you need to get people off the streets, you need to get them into attainable and suitable housing with appropriate supports, that's actually far cheaper than people going through the criminal justice system and having to rely on emergency services. So, I really think one of the key challenges ahead, not only for the province, is also the city to work more closely together. Housing and homelessness is, predominantly a provincial jurisdiction, but the reality is we see it in our downtown, and it's the city of Lethbridge that must respond. And so those two levels of government are going to have to work much tighter together to try and work through some practical solutions.
And can you just give us an update on what our job numbers are looking like this spring, and how does that compare over the last few years?
Yeah, great question. So the unemployment rate in May actually rose to 5.3% for the Lethbridge Census Metropolitan Area. That's actually the 5th consecutive monthly increase. And so we're now at the highest level of unemployment since April of 2022. Now, that's not necessarily the worst thing. Prior to this, we were down around the 3% mark, which is a very tight labor market, very challenging for employers to hire people. So having a higher unemployment rate actually means there's more people that are potentially available in the workforce. Although last month employment fell by about 2,200 jobs, and we're down almost 5,900 jobs since the beginning of the year. So it's not a good trend. It's something we're watching very closely. And what's really driving that is something called the participation rate. So that's when people either drop out of the workforce or stop looking for work. Now, that can be things like retirements, that can be people returning back to school. But our participation rate is down 5.8% since the beginning of the year, and it compares very unfavorably to previous years. So that's something that's a bigger concern to me, is that people are either giving up hope or they're just stepping away from the workforce. And in an already tight labor market, where we have lots of job vacancies, people not engaging in the workforce is a really big concern for us. Specifically, wholesale and retail trade was the bulk of the losses this month. That sector was down almost 1,600 jobs. So not really sure what drove that in the last month. Something we'll definitely have to keep an eye on. Again, month to month, the economy changes, things happen. We're more interested in the long-term trends, but jobs are down since the beginning of the year and unemployment is up, which is the concern.
And what would it take to reverse those numbers?
Yeah, we have seen, thankfully, gains in manufacturing, for example. So manufacturing added 500 jobs last month. And actually, since the beginning of the year, the manufacturing sector is up almost 3,000 positions. So we've seen huge job growth there. Construction is another area that suffered a little bit in the last couple of years, particularly with COVID. Construction was up 500 positions last month. So that's, again, a little bit of sunshine coming into that puzzle. Again, for us, it's working with employers to understand what the barriers are. Like I said, our last survey indicated workforce availability was a challenge, but also affordability of utilities. So what are those other things that are keeping businesses from expanding? What are some of those other costs that perhaps are preventing people from hiring? That's what we've got to explore.
And one of our main economic drivers in our area is the agriculture sector. So can you just tell us, how are things looking over there?
Yeah, last year was a phenomenal year for the agriculture sector. So farmers across Alberta actually recognized an all-time high for net income. Net income for the agriculture sector was $3.3 billion. Again, never seen that level before. And that's great news when you think about last year in the context of skyrocketing inflation. Operating expenses for our growers was astronomical, but they were able to offset that. So yields were higher than they've been. Higher commodity prices helped bring additional revenues to farmers to offset those expenses. So that was great. Lethbridge, we also saw double-digit growth in our exports. So exports from the Lethbridge region, which are typically manufactured goods, but a lot of agri-food, were up almost 23% to just over $2.16 billion, which is the highest level we've seen. So that's the good news. Mm-hmm. This year, though, things are not quite as rosy. So we know that the weather is a bit of a concern. We've already seen drought-like conditions across a good chunk of the province. A number of growers have expressed concerns about what crops and yields could look like if there isn't sufficient rain. So yields may not be what they were last year. And certainly when you have Russia continuing its aggression and its invasion of Ukraine, that's a challenge for global commodity prices and demand because the Ukraine is such a significant player in terms of the agricultural exports. So lots of uncertainty in the ag space. You know, we're still in a good position, but whether that's the biggest question mark at this point, I think.
And what's the latest with the agribusiness hub and trade center? Is it causing more businesses to look towards Lethbridge as a market?
Yeah, it's a little too early to tell right now. I mean, the agri-food hub is going along well. The team over at the Lethbridge and District Exhibition is actually planning their grand opening for August the 10th. So the building is not yet operational. It will be very, very soon. Well, it's exciting to kick off the summer and whoop-up days with the opening of that brand new facility. And why it's exciting, I think, really it's a state-of-the-art, it's a world-class venue that will allow us to attract much bigger events to Lethbridge. We're hoping to attract the attention of various national and international organizations and trade associations and industry groups. And so the long-term vision for that facility, the agri-food hub, is really going to be a showcase of what Southern Alberta can do. It's going to be a place where we can bring innovators and collaborators together. And of course, that very much fits into this idea of Canada's premier food corridor along Highway 3. And of course, the agri-food hub is going to be that building is very much going to be at the hub of that food corridor.
And what are you hearing from the agribusiness sector? Like, how are things looking over there?
Well, again, similar to agriculture, concern around the potential of weather impacting crops and yields this year, coming out of a very strong year. Hopefully people have got capital available to make equipment installations and those kinds of things. Agri-food in general is performing very well. Like I said, we've seen double-digit exports. We've seen growth in all of our exports from our region. And so, generally our tagline is, if you're in the food business, you should be here. You should be in Southern Alberta. Southern Alberta feeds the world, and we expect a hungry, glowing population around the world to need more of what we produce. So I think long-term, Southern Alberta is going to be just fine. We just have to get through this next year and kind of see what the season is going to hold.
And switching gears a bit, what's the general outlook for the construction industry here?
Yeah, construction saw a bit of an employment gain last month, which was good. Like I said before, 500 jobs added in the construction industry. Although year to date, certainly construction is not where it has been historically, still down overall. I think a lot of that is being driven by the pullback in new home starts. So residential construction is down, and that's probably being driven by some of the interest rate increases we've seen from the Bank of Canada, cost of lending, those kinds of things. But where we have seen growth is actually in the non-residential sector. So that's things like institutional or government builds, that's commercial and industrial real estate. So we have seen gains in those areas, and there's a number of projects in the pipeline. There's roughly $1 billion worth of construction projects in the pipeline over the next few years. And so that's the encouraging thing for the construction sector. This is the most activity we've seen in a while for them. So optimistic there.
You briefly touched on this. We just had another interest rate hike from the Bank of Canada. What is the real estate sector looking like these days? Because I hear Lethbridge is still one of the most affordable cities not only in Alberta, but in Canada.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly our key tactical advantage, is that we are one of the most affordable markets across Canada. Lethbridge is certainly a place where you can come build a life and have a great quality of life because it is reasonably affordable relative to the rest of the country. The challenge, of course, though, is that the Bank of Canada did raise interest rates this month, and they are likely expected again to do the same in July. So the cost of borrowing continues to go up. The central bank is very concerned about the impact of inflation, and they are overtly trying to slow down the economy and suppress growth. So it is a specific tactic that central banks do to control inflation. What that means, of course, is that new homes, getting into a new mortgage, changing up, exchanging homes, all of that is much more expensive than it was even a year ago. So we have seen a pullback in residential. New home sales, sort of same home sales, so the recycling in the market's fairly steady, but it's not perhaps as robust as it had been in previous years. We've also seen a bit of a pullback in commercial real estate, office and retail suffering a bit. Where we've seen strength in our market is industrial real estate. There's far more demand than there is supply at this point, in particular that 25 to 40,000 square foot sort of warehouse. We've seen lots of inquiries for that and just not any facilities to use. And the other thing about industrial real estate, there's been a number of studies point this out, that Lethbridge is even more affordable on the industrial side than anywhere in Canada. And so we've actually seen reports of BC businesses migrating from British Columbia to Alberta to take advantage of that. And I'll just have to point out to all of those interested parties from BC that Lethbridge has some of the cheapest industrial prices in all of Alberta. So again, there's opportunities there for us to pick up some business, I think.
And do you have any final thoughts on the direction of the Lethbridge economy over the next 6 months or so?
Yeah, I'm sure I sound like a broken record every time I'm invited on this show, but Lethbridge does have a reasonably diversified economy. You mentioned that right off the top. We're well positioned to ride out any troublesome waves that come our way for the rest of the year. Agri-food, of course, being a strong base, the public sector employers that we have being a strong base. And inside of the country, Alberta has one of the stronger economies expected this year. And so Alberta is well placed to ride out the storm as well. So I remain cautiously optimistic. That's not to say there isn't some challenges ahead or that some people aren't feeling pain. I don't want to minimize that. But overall, I think we're in a good position, and I remain very optimistic about Lethbridge's prospects.
Trevor Lewington is the CEO of Economic Development in Lethbridge. Trevor, thanks so much for being with us today.
Appreciate the opportunity once again.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.